It was the year 2019. I was in my second year of college and worked as a babysitter 3 to 4 times a week to pay the installments on my car. For about a month, I took care of a 3-year-old boy weekly. His parents were calm and kind. They always left around the time the child was going to sleep. My only responsibility was to make sure he stayed asleep and was safe during the 4 or 5 hours they were gone. On that particular night, I arrived at 8 o'clock. I greeted the parents, who told me the boy was already asleep in his room. They thanked me for coming and left. I never questioned why they went out so late every week. I vaguely remember them mentioning something about going into town, maybe a romantic date. I set my bag on the floor, made my usual inspection around the house, and settled into a chair in the living room. Although they always told me to make myself at home, watch TV, cook whatever I wanted, I usually spent the time on my phone. Occasionally, I would check the child's bedroom door. Less than an hour later, I received a call from the mother. I answered, confused, when she asked if I called her. I said no. I was still in the house and hadn't made any calls. She had received a call from an unknown number where no one spoke when she picked up. She thought I might have been using another phone, and the call didn't go through properly. I assured her everything was fine. She agreed and hung up. I didn't think much of it, probably just maternal concern. I checked on the boy again and went back to my seat. About 20 minutes later, while watching a video on my phone, I saw headlights shining through the front windows through the gaps in the blinds. I assumed it was a neighbor arriving, but after several minutes with the lights still on, I got up to look. A dark gray sedan was parked right in front of the house, next to the curb. Old and rusty, with tinted windows. I was so focused on the vehicle that I almost didn't notice the man standing a few meters away from it, closer to the end of the driveway, on the sidewalk, watching the house. I felt uneasy, but I didn't want to confront him since it wasn't my house. I simply watched. After a minute, he went back to the car and got inside. Strangely, he drove away very slowly, as if he was still focused on the house. I watched his headlights go down the street, appearing and disappearing between the trees, until they stopped again at the end of the street. The light remained still among the trees, and then turned off, as if the car had parked and the driver had gotten out. Maybe he was looking for a neighbor's address. Finding it strange, I continued watching from the window for about 5 minutes, but I never saw the man again, so I chalked it up to a strange coincidence. I went back to the chair. I considered texting the parents, but I didn't want to worry them over something probably insignificant. I decided to turn on the TV at a low volume so the child wouldn't wake up. A few minutes later, I opened the curtains too, because I was still thinking about what had happened. An hour and a half, maybe 2 hours passed. Nothing really happened. I just waited in the living room with the TV on, trying to stay awake. My eyes were heavy, and I realized I was half asleep, still awake, but disconnected, with my eyes partly open. In my reduced state of awareness, I heard a faint noise. I only fully woke up when I heard it again. I opened my eyes wider and stood up. Not knowing what it was, I wanted to check on the boy first and started walking toward the stairs. As I walked through the hallway, I heard the noise again and saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head. There was someone outside the back door, pulling the handle and looking straight at me. When he realized I saw him, he began pulling the handle harder, trying to force his way in. Adrenaline surged through me and I ran upstairs. I went to the bedroom and picked up the boy, trying to keep him calm. From upstairs, the noises got louder. Now he was using something to try to break down the door. With the boy in my arms, I hurried downstairs. When I reached the bottom, I heard another noise. It sounded like plastic and metal breaking. I turned toward the hallway that led to the front door, but I saw the back door open and the man entering quickly. He wore casual clothes and had dark hair. That was all I managed to see before noticing a knife in his hand. He didn't hesitate and started running toward me. I ran out the front door, got into my car, and reversed just as he reached the window. I drove to a safe place and called emergency services and the parents. Naturally, he had already fled before anyone arrived. In my interpretation, I think he intended to threaten me with a knife or even hurt me to kidnap the boy. But how did he know the parents would be gone? And why kidnap this child specifically? The strangest part is that after all this, The parents stopped communicating with me and never hired me again. They thanked me the night of the incident, but after that, they disappeared. It seemed like they didn't want me to find out something about what had happened. I did my own investigation, but didn't find much. The only discovery was that the mother had previously been married to a man who somewhat resembled the one I saw. There's no certainty, just speculation. Years have passed, so we'll probably never know the answers. It was last year, around mid-January. I live in a relatively small house in a small, wooded town located about 45 minutes from a larger urban center. That day, I only worked a half shift, so I was free to relax at home that evening. Around 7 at night, I received an unexpected call from a friend. He said he was having car trouble and asked if I could pick him up and maybe grab something to eat together. I didn't mind and told him I was already on my way. It wasn't the first time, so we were used to it. I grabbed my jacket from the entryway closet, my keys, and opened the front door to leave. The moment I opened it, my whole body jolted. There was a man standing right in front of me on the porch, less than a meter from the door. He was wearing a heavy coat with a black scarf covering the lower half of his face. The man didn't move, as if he wasn't nearly as startled as I was. For a second, I only felt embarrassed for having jumped like that, but then I became curious about why he was there. Before I could ask, he apologized, saying he had been about to knock. I told him it was fine and asked what he needed. He hesitated for a moment and then asked if I was David or Daryl, something like that. Whoever it wasn't me. I told him no. He simply said, okay, and started walking off the porch. I stepped outside, closed and locked the door behind me, making sure he had walked to the end of the driveway, and moved away before I got in my car. I kept thinking about that strange encounter the entire drive to my friend's workplace. My house was in a secluded neighborhood. It wasn't common for random people to wander around looking for houses, because the streets go deep into the woods and the driveways are long. I figured maybe he was looking for someone else. I picked up my friend, we grabbed a quick bite, and then I dropped him off at home. It was around 9 at night. It was snowing lightly, but otherwise it was quiet. When I got home, I parked, went to the door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. I took a moment to warm up, then collapsed onto the couch and turned on the TV. I didn't keep track of time after that since I had no work the next day. If I had to guess, I'd say I stayed on the couch for about 2 hours before I felt sleepy. I stood up, stretched, turned off the TV, and started walking toward the stairs. But as I passed the front door, I suddenly remembered the man who had been there earlier. I had practically forgotten about him until that moment. Thinking about it, I went to the door and looked through the peephole to ease my mind. No one was on the porch, and the night looked calm. It was still snowing and not very windy. However, after a second, I noticed something crossing the driveway. It wasn't clear, so I needed to open the door to see better. There were shoe prints on the thin layer of snow. They seemed to come from the road and went toward my car. Then the footprints moved away toward the yard where the trees blocked my view. I immediately felt a chill. I closed and locked the door. If it was the same man returning again, then something was truly wrong. I kept checking the windows while thinking about what to do, reflecting on how strange my encounter with that man had been only made worse. At that point, I was worried enough to call the police. I called emergency services and stayed near the window, explaining my situation. As I spoke, I started hearing something faint. Whenever I stopped to listen, it disappeared. The operator probably thought I was losing my mind, but about a minute into the call, there was a loud crash at the back of the house. I almost dropped the phone in shock. I ran into the hallway and heard another loud crash. When I looked, I saw someone outside the back door. With the reflections of the indoor light contrasted against the darkness outside, I couldn't see anything clearly, just slight movement behind the door. Another loud crash hit the door. It was heavy. The person definitely had some tool or weapon to break it down. The operator told me to find a place to hide and lock myself in or find a way to escape. I decided to grab my keys and run to the car. Even knowing the man was behind the house, it was still terrifying to run outside. There could have been more than one person or someone waiting near the car. Thankfully, no one was there, managed to get away. It was fortunate that I left when I did, because when the police arrived, the back door had already been destroyed and wet footprints were all over the house. But no one was inside. All I could give the police was the description of the man at my door, but there was no evidence it was the same person. So even if they found him, it wouldn't have helped much, but they never found him. Whoever it was, I think I was lucky to have encountered him while I was heading out earlier. If I hadn't seen him, I might not have checked the door before going to bed. If I had already been asleep, they might have been more discreet breaking in. I don't know. But what's so disturbing is that all of this happened on an ordinary day. There was no way to know. It could happen any day. And with him still out there, sometimes I feel like he's just waiting for it to happen again. It was last year during a solo road trip I was taking. Most of the roads out there are practically deserted, except for the first and last hour of driving. The rest is nothing but forest or open fields, maybe some small mountains when I headed further west. Because of the way I planned everything, I was going to drive through the night and most of the day instead of spending 2 full days on the road and paying for an extra hotel. I knew it would be tough, but I thought it would be worth it. I started the trip at 7 in the evening. I double-checked that everything was packed properly in the car and that my snacks and other things were on the front seat. Then I hit the road. The first hour was through a city and some small towns, but after that it was nothing but open highway. There were barely any cars and few places to stop, besides a gas station every 24 kilometers or so. After an hour or two, I had only used a third of the tank. But since the gas stations were getting farther apart, I decided to fill up before entering the more rural stretch of the trip. It took about 20 minutes until I found a station. There was no one else there. It was just a very small place with 4 pumps. The convenience store wasn't even open. I parked by one of the pumps, got out of the car, and started fueling. I don't know if it was because the place was old or hadn't been refilled in a while, but the gas was coming out incredibly slow. Almost a full minute just for 1 liter. I leaned against the car and waited. That's when another car appeared on the road. The speed limit was 88 kilometers per hour, but it looked like it was going maybe 30 kilometers per hour. It drove past the station, then slowed down and came back. That was strange and honestly, a little dangerous on a 1-lane road like that in the middle of the night. But the car returned to the entrance and pulled into the station, stopping right behind me. I figured they had missed the entrance and really needed gas. I kept looking forward while I heard someone get out of the car and walk over to the other side of the vehicle. But after a minute, without hearing the pump or any movement, I turned to see what he was doing. The man was wearing a gray flannel shirt and black pants. He was relatively tall and staring at me. When I looked over, he was already looking directly at me. I gave him an awkward smile and nodded. Then I looked the other way again. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching me. After about 10 seconds, I finally heard him grab the pump and start fueling his car. I felt relieved, thinking maybe he really was just filling up and I was overreacting. I waited another minute and decided I had waited long enough. I removed the pump and locked the fuel cap. When I did, I saw the man staring at me again. His eyes looked dull and heavy, like he was exhausted but had taken a huge amount of caffeine or something. I got back in the car and drove off. What weird guy, I thought, but didn't dwell on it. At some point during the next 3 hours, it started to rain. I had been driving for 5 hours total, and it was a little after midnight. The rain forced me to focus more on the road, which made the trip even more tiring. I tried drinking an energy drink and eating something, but it didn't help much. By 1 in the morning, I really needed a break. My fuel was starting to run low, too. I drove along that long, empty road until I finally saw a gas station where I could stop. The place looked pretty run down and was just as empty as the first one, but at least the lights were on. I parked, filled up the tank, and then parked next to the small building in one of the spaces. I checked the weather to see how long the rain would last and looked for a nearby town. But there wasn't one. It felt like I was in the middle of nowhere. I decided it was fine to take a 30-minute nap, just to recharge a bit and maybe give the rain a chance to slow down. I leaned back and fell asleep. When I woke up, The rain was still tapping on the roof of the car, and my alarm hadn't gone off. I had slept for about 25 minutes. I sat up and looked out the windshield. The place was silent, but there was a car at one of the pumps. I leaned forward and looked closer. It was the same car from the other stop. I was almost sure of it. Either it was a huge coincidence or something was wrong. Even stranger, the man was nowhere to be seen. Not inside the car, not outside. I felt my face go pale. Where the hell was this guy? There was no one else at this empty station where he could be hiding. I didn't want to stay and find out. I started the car and put it in reverse, but when I looked in the mirror while backing up, I saw him. Not behind the car. He was in my back seat, his eyes locked on me, cutting through the darkness. I lurched forward and flung the door open, jumping out. The car was still in reverse, so it slowly kept rolling backward. I started running, but I didn't hear the man getting out of the car. I ran into the woods and watched my car continue rolling back for a moment, then suddenly stop. A second later, he drove off, leaving me stranded at an unfamiliar gas station in the middle of nowhere. That's when I realized my phone was still on the dashboard. I stood there in shock for a minute in the rain, trying to process what was happening. Then I looked at his car. He had just left it behind. I walked over and found the door unlocked, with the keys still in the ignition and some random groceries in the back seat. And by some strange chance, I found his phone on the floor by the passenger seat. It was locked, but I was able to call emergency services from the lock screen. I didn't understand it at the time. I guess I thought whoever stole my car was just stupid and left everything behind. But that car wasn't his either. It had been stolen too. Everything inside the car belonged to someone else, someone he had done the same thing to that he tried to do to me. From what I heard, those people weren't as lucky to get away completely unharmed. When I talked to the investigators, they didn't think he hid in my back seat and let me start driving for no reason. He was probably waiting until we were back on the road to reveal himself. And who knows what he wanted to do to me or what he had planned. He was never found, and neither was my car. A few years ago, I was driving back from a trip. I chose to drive, and it had been a good trip. On my way back, I didn't have a very solid plan besides driving until I got tired. I managed to keep going until probably midnight before I became really sleepy. Instead of chugging a huge amount of energy drinks and trying to push on to the next big city, I decided to stop and sleep. I found a random town in the middle of nowhere. There wasn't much there, and it looked like it truly was in the middle of nowhere. After leaving the highway, I found a gas station and then a small motel. It didn't look great from the outside, but I was really tired and didn't care much. I just wanted a place to sleep. I parked and decided to get a room. Judging by the parking lot, it looked like many rooms were available. I went into the front office, got a room, and headed over to it. When I went inside, it was a typical motel room, just as you'd expect. It opened directly onto the walkway, and the inside wasn't very clean, but nothing too terrible. It had a small TV, a bed, and a bathroom. I immediately got ready for bed and tried to fall asleep. I know I fell asleep very quickly that night, but sometime later I woke up. I remember waking up because of a sound. As I became more awake, I realized someone was knocking on the window of my room. I looked, but I couldn't see anything because there was a very thick curtain covering the window from the inside. I stayed there in bed listening. The knocking was very deliberate, as if someone was trying to bother me or get my attention. I didn't think it could be anything else. I was curious, but also really scared, and I didn't want to get up to see what it was. Then it stopped. I stayed there for 2 or 3 minutes without hearing anything else. I decided to try to go back to sleep, but just before I drifted off, I heard another sound. This time, someone was knocking on my door. There was no mistaking it. It was much louder than the window knocks, and it was definitely the same person. I was really curious, so this time I decided to get up and see who was there. I quickly got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. When I got there, I didn't open it, but I looked through the peephole. However, when I did, all I could see was darkness. It was like whoever was at the door was deliberately covering the peephole with their hand or something. So I had no idea who was out there. I quietly moved to the window to try to see from there. But because of how the window was positioned, you couldn't see the door unless the person stood a few meters back. I lifted part of the curtain at the edge and looked, but I could only see a portion of the person's back. It looked like a man. I couldn't see his face or anything else, just that he was at the door. I went back to bed. The man kept knocking from time to time. I didn't know what to do. Then, after several minutes of knocking, it finally stopped. I stayed there listening to see if he would start again. After about 10 minutes of nothing but silence, I finally felt relaxed enough to try to sleep again. I lay back down, and probably within 5 minutes, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up and at first completely forgot about the strange encounters from the night before. I wanted to leave early to get back on the road, so I grabbed my things and left the room around 7:30. However, when I walked out, I saw that there was some damage on the door of the room I was staying in. It looked like someone had used a crowbar or something like that to try to force the door open. It wasn't like that when I checked in the night before. I knew that for sure. I remember the man at the door and realized he must have tried to break in. That really gave me chills. I went to my car and saw more marks on the car door. I got in, and thankfully nothing was missing. He hadn't managed to get inside either. I left quickly and got back on the highway. Looking back, I still get scared thinking that I slept while someone was trying to get into my room. I'm just grateful he didn't succeed. Why did he give up? I don't know. Maybe the doors were actually strong. Or maybe he was just bad at breaking in. Maybe someone scared him away. Or maybe he just wanted to frighten me. But either way, it was a very scary and unforgettable experience in a sketchy little motel. I once stayed at a pretty ordinary hotel. I travel frequently for work, which takes me to many different parts of the country. Because of that, I've stayed in lots of hotels over the years. I've been in some very good places and some really bad ones. This one was somewhere in the middle. I was probably on the 3rd floor in a standard room with a bed and a decent TV. I stayed up late in the room, finishing some work. Afterwards, to relax, I watched TV in bed until I started feeling sleepy. I remember that around 1 in the morning, I got a call on a room phone. I thought it was strange. It wasn't my cell phone, but the landline in the room. It was clearly the front desk calling, but why would they bother me at 1 in the morning? I walked over to the phone and answered it. I heard a man's voice on the other end saying I needed to come down to the front desk. I asked why, but he didn't answer. He just told me to come down immediately and then hung up. I had checked in much earlier, and it was a woman who helped me at the front desk. So this wasn't the same person. I assumed this man was the night shift receptionist. I was really irritated and annoyed that they were calling me at 1 in the morning without giving me a reason. I angrily slipped on my sandals and left the room. I went to the elevator and headed down to the 1st floor. When I got there, the hotel looked completely empty. I walked to the front desk, and there was no one there. Near the desk was the breakfast area, and there were some meeting rooms in a hallway nearby, but there wasn't a single person anywhere. I looked behind the counter and got even more annoyed. I didn't bother ringing the bell or calling out to see if anyone was there. I didn't care. I went straight back to the elevator and headed up again. If they were going to bother me at that hour, they should at least be there where they told me to go. I wasn't going to wait around. I took the elevator back up, returned to my floor, went to my room, got inside, and lay down again to keep watching TV. About 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. I was so angry. I picked it up and said, "What do you want?" The same man told me to come down to the front desk. He was speaking louder now, with a more authoritative tone. I told him I'd already gone downstairs. He said I hadn't, and that I needed to come back. While he was still talking, I hung up the phone and unplugged it from the wall. Then I went back to bed and lay down again. It had been a long day, and I was exhausted. After lying down, within about 10 minutes, I started drifting off to sleep, but I was interrupted again. This time, I heard someone knocking on the door. I got out of bed and rushed to the door. When I got there, I heard someone hurrying away. I looked through the peephole just as I heard that, but the person was already gone. I opened the door and only heard footsteps. I looked around and didn't see anyone. There were a few places in the hallway they could have gone. It wasn't just one long hallway. There were other hallways connected to it. I went back inside and locked the door. I had no idea why I was being bothered. I got back into bed, and this time I was able to fall asleep. The next morning, everything was fine. I went down for the hotel breakfast, and now there were lots of other people around. I went to the front desk and asked who had been on duty overnight. They gave me the name of a woman, and I told them what had happened. They said that wasn't something she would do, and I knew I had spoken to a man, not a woman. So I don't know who that person on the phone was, or why he was pretending to be calling from the front desk. I still don't have any answers, but that was the strangest thing that has ever happened to me in all my years of traveling. Last year, I went on vacation with my girlfriend, Zoe. We flew there and stayed at a really nice hotel near the beach. The hotel was only a few blocks away, so we could walk there, which was great. We stayed for about 5 days. A few days into the trip, something very strange happened. Until that moment, we had been enjoying our vacation a lot. We spent plenty of time at the beach, at local restaurants, and visiting tourist attractions. One night we came back late, both tired from walking around all day. I went to take a shower, and while I was in the bathroom, Zoe said she was going to get some ice. She left the room, and I finished my shower. Then I went back and sat on the bed. About 2 minutes later, Zoe came back into the room quickly. I noticed she shut the door fast and locked it behind her. Then she said a strange man had been following her. I asked her to explain, and she said she had gone to the second floor to get some ice. She told me that as she started walking down the hallway on the second floor, she saw a man standing there. She went into the ice room, and while she was inside, she heard the man start walking toward her. When he reached the ice room, he walked in. She thought he was just waiting for her to finish so he could get ice, but when she was done, he just stood there staring at her. She walked past him and left, and he started following her down the hallway. She didn't want to wait for the elevator, so she took the stairs, and he did the same. When she reached our floor again, she ran as fast as she could back to the room. She described the man as maybe around 50 years old, with a graying beard, somewhat tall and thin. I decided to go out into the hallway to see if he was still there. When I stepped out, I didn't see anyone. The hallway was completely empty. I walked around a bit, thinking he had already left. I went back to the room, and shortly after, we went to sleep. I thought the situation was over. The next morning, we were leaving the hotel. As soon as we walked out and started down the sidewalk, Zoe said she saw the man again. She pointed at a guy standing across the street on the sidewalk. I looked, and it was the man. He wasn't looking at us and seemed to just be standing there. We kept walking and turned to the next street. We stayed out for a long time. Later that day, we were far from the hotel, walking around the city. We were on the sidewalk, and suddenly we saw the man again. While we were waiting to cross the street, we looked back and saw the man standing about 20 feet behind us. There were several other people walking along the sidewalk, so he blended in easily, but we still noticed him. I didn't know if it was just a huge coincidence or not. It didn't feel like a coincidence. I wanted to get away from him. We decided to change direction and take a different route. When we did, it seemed like we had lost him because I didn't see him anymore. Later, we went to a restaurant and sat outside. While we were there, I noticed the same man standing across the street. He seemed to be watching us, or more specifically, watching Zoe. The guy was really starting to scare us now. It looked like he was trying to follow Zoe everywhere. I considered getting up and confronting him right there, but I decided not to. The man continued looking in our direction for about 5 minutes. Then he walked away. We didn't see him again for the rest of the night while we were out. When we got back to the hotel, we saw him again. As we were entering the lobby, the man was already inside the hotel, sitting in a chair in the corner. We walked to the elevator, and as the doors were closing, we saw him stand up. He didn't come to the elevator, but we were suspicious of what he might do. We went up to our floor. We quickly walked to our room and went inside. After we got in, Zoe started looking through the peephole. She thought the man might try to come to our door or something. About a minute later, she told me she saw him. I got irritated and decided to confront the man. Zoe said he was just standing near our door, but didn't knock. I went to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. It was just me and the man, and he was definitely there. When I stepped out, he started walking away. I told him to stop and asked what his problem was. The man stopped and turned around. He had a very angry expression. I asked why he was following us. He didn't say anything. He started walking toward me and pulled something out of his pocket. At first, I didn't know what it was, but after a few seconds I realized it was a taser. He came closer and tried to hit me with the taser. I jumped back, and thankfully I wasn't hit. I ran to the stairs, ran down as fast as I could, and he didn't chase me. When I reached the lobby, I reported the man to the front desk. They called the police. I stayed in the lobby until the police arrived, and I called Zoe, telling her to stay in the room. The police arrived shortly after and started searching the hotel for the man. After a while, they found him and took him out of the hotel. I don't know if he was arrested or not, but I know he was banned from entering the hotel again. When I went back to the room, Zoe told me that after I called her, she heard someone knocking on the door. She knew it was the man and didn't answer. She also said he tried to open the door, but it was locked. For the rest of the trip, we didn't see him again. A few years ago, I was on a road trip with my friend John. We were driving back home and taking turns behind the wheel so we could cover more distance during the day. After driving for about 14 hours straight, it was already nighttime and we both needed rest. Since I was driving, John offered to find us a hotel. That ended up being a terrible mistake because he is extremely frugal. When he said he had found a great place, I made the mistake of trusting him. I asked if the place was decent, and he assured me it looked good. I mentioned that I didn't want to stay somewhere sketchy and that I could keep driving so we could pay for something better, but he insisted the place was excellent. Following his directions, about 20 minutes later, we left the main highway and arrived in a small town. There wasn't much around, and something fell off right away. The streets were poorly lit and dark. We turned onto an unpaved road, and I questioned where we were going. He assured me we were close, and soon I saw the place. It was the sketchiest motel I had ever seen. I'm not picky, and I've stayed in basic places before, but this one made the simplest motels look luxurious. I asked him to look for another option, but John argued that it was late and he had already booked it. In the parking lot, I tried to look for alternatives on my phone, but I had no signal. John insisted and got out of the car. Exhausted after the long day, I gave in and followed him. He picked up the keys and we headed to the room. The motel was a single-story building with all the rooms lined up and facing the parking lot. There were 3 other vehicles parked on the cracked pavement with weeds growing through it. Around us, there was just an empty lot on one side and an abandoned gas station on the other. Once we got inside, John went straight to the bed farthest from the door and fell asleep instantly, within less than 5 minutes. I sat down on my bed, thirsty and hungry, since I had run out of water. I went back outside to look for a vending machine. Outside, everything was completely silent. I walked around and found a soda machine between the motel building and the office in a narrow passageway. There were only a few options, and I chose water. I inserted the coin and selected water, but nothing happened. I was frustrated about losing the money. Suddenly, a guy appeared from behind the motel building, where there was nothing. He had long, messy hair, was very skinny, and didn't say a word. He just walked until he was about 6 feet from me and stopped, staring. I tried to be polite and greeted him, but got no response. I decided to leave and immediately heard his footsteps behind me. I sped up toward the rooms and noticed he was about 20 feet away. As soon as I reached our room, I heard him start running. I didn't look back. Thankfully, the key worked on the first try. I got in quickly and locked the door hard. The very next second, he tried to open it. He started pounding on the door, and I had no idea who he was or what he wanted, though I wasn't entirely surprised, given the place. He began shouting incomprehensible things. After about 5 minutes of banging, yelling, and trying to get in, he finally left. John slept through the entire incident. I managed to fall asleep sometime later. The next morning, John commented that he had the best night of sleep and that we got an amazing price. I told him about almost being attacked by some disturbed stranger, but he didn't believe me and thought I made it up. It really happened, and I will never take a trip like that with him again. I currently work the night shift at a large chain hotel. As with any previous job, most people are normal and pleasant, but working overnight, strange individuals inevitably show up. Although most don't make me nervous, and I rarely need to call the police, if someone has a valid credit card, ID, and doesn't seem problematic, I check them in. I mention this to emphasize that it's rare for me to refuse guests when rooms are available. One night, around 3 a.m., a guest arrived who was an exception to all of those guidelines. On the cameras, I saw this man walk in and went to the front desk to greet him. I immediately noticed he had the most unsettling eyes I had ever seen. He stared at me in a way that's hard to describe, seemingly without blinking. It made me extremely uncomfortable. As he approached with that strange stare, he asked, "Why are you so nervous? Why is everyone so nervous? What's going on?" My guard was up, but I was still willing to check him in. I told him no one was nervous and asked if he wanted a room. I requested an ID and credit card, and he hesitated in a way that made me fear he was about to pull a weapon. I immediately walked in the back office and shut the door. I watched him on the camera for about a minute before deciding to step out again. He handed over his documents, and as I was processing the reservation, he pointed to the desk behind me and asked, "Who designed that?" I instantly realized he wanted me to turn my back. Without doing so, I asked him to leave. Then he pointed to a police badge in his wallet, saying something like, "Did you see this? Are you okay? Is everything okay here?" He acted with fake concern, as if I might be a victim of someone. I assumed the badge was fake and repeated that he needed to leave. That's when I noticed he had wet his pants. I went back into the office and watched him on the camera. He slowly walked out, said something to a guest in the lobby, and then wandered around the parking lot. That was when I called the police because I was genuinely scared. After leaving, he walked to the hotel across the street and wandered around their parking lot, then drove slowly past our building, looking inside. The guest and I were both on edge, and he suggested the man might come back armed. The guest waited for his ride in a separate area. Thankfully, that was the worst of it. The police arrived within 5 minutes and detained him across the street for drunk driving. I later found out he was actually a retired police chief, which I confirmed after finding articles about him online. I warned everyone at work to stay alert. My boyfriend had a work trip to a city 4 hours away, and I decided to visit him since we're in a long-distance relationship. Because the decision was sudden, we couldn't book a room in advance. His hotel was paid for by the company and had a strict policy against visitors or extra guests. We had to look for a place at night, and since the area was busy, every hotel was full except one. It was a simple 2- or 3-star place, but I accepted it because we had no other option and the area was safe. Besides, my boyfriend is someone I trust, so I wasn't worried. We checked in, and the environment was peculiar. I didn't see a single other woman besides myself. I didn't think much of it because I was happy to see him again after so long. We were supposed to stay for 3 nights and 2 days, but he would leave at 7 a.m. for work and only return at night. On the 3rd day, after he left, I was taking a nap. I dreamed that I was alone and an employee came in to deliver breakfast and started pulling me by the legs. I woke up startled from being completely alone, but realized it was just a dream. I calmed down and watched TV. 2 hours later, around 6 p.m., I was getting ready to shower before we headed out for a date on the beach. I was procrastinating when the electronic lock suddenly beeped, the sound it makes when someone unlocks the door with a key card. I froze as a man opened the door, walked in, and stared at me sitting on the bed. He looked me up and down, then shut the door behind him. He gave me the most ridiculous explanation. I was just checking if the air conditioning remote and the TV remote were in the room. I was stunned. He was clearly lying. I ordered food and other things several times a day, so the staff probably knew my boyfriend left early and came back late. They knew I stayed alone all day. I asked, "How can you just walk into my room like that?" He said he didn't know anyone was inside, which also seemed like a lie. He finally left without apologizing or saying anything. I locked the door, though it didn't mean much since he had a master key and could come back. I called my boyfriend, and thank God I wasn't naked yet. I don't know what could have happened. I told him everything, and he came immediately, confronting the hotel staff. He called them out, and they all pretended not to understand the problem. As we left, the man who had entered my room gave me the creepiest look imaginable. The strangest part is that the incident happened exactly 2 hours after I had that dream. There was also urine in the toilet that day. It couldn't have been mine because I had been asleep and no one else should have had access. I didn't find out who did it, and no one had flushed. I asked my boyfriend, and he said it wasn't him.